Today, Ralph Hanna joins me today, and we're speaking about the World Cup, of course, continuing the series. And we're speaking about Paraguay. Ralph, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So, Ralph, I had to ask you this question. Paraguay isn't a country that is on everyone's mind. So, I wanted to ask you, why on earth are you following Paraguay?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, started my kind of knowledge of Paraguay started back in '98 when they went to the World Cup. Then I remember them losing to France, but I actually went out there for the first time 2003, and then I moved there in 2010. My wife's from Paraguay. My kids were born there. We now live in the US, but being there and being in the country, we never got the opportunity to see them go to a World Cup because while I was living there, it was kind of these wilderness years before they came back. But the passion for football is unmatched, and it's a country that really lives and breathes football, and it's impossible not to kind of be dragged into that as you're living there.
Of course, and I think that's the same in a lot of countries, but particularly in South America. We need to start off then with the whole storyline. So the World Cup qualification for Paraguay looked unbelievable when I was doing all the research on it today. I mean, a 1-0 win against Brazil, beat Argentina, beat Uruguay, essentially beat everyone in their way. Was that expected of Paraguay going into those qualifiers?
I think going into the qualifiers, there was definitely a feeling that they should be able to qualify because it was an expanded tournament. There were more places available. Obviously, CONMEBOL's only 10 teams, and so with at least six going in, they felt they should be able to. But the reality was, as they started that campaign, they picked up very few points and particularly very few wins. They were finding it hard to win. They were drawing a few games. And then they went to the Copa America in the US in 2024 and had a disastrous campaign. In fact, their worst ever campaign where they didn't pick up a single point, losing in the final game to Costa Rica, who were managed by Gustavo Alfaro. And that Gustavo Alfaro, after the Copa America, actually becomes Paraguay coach. And that's when we see this whole shift in mentality and the change. And as you mentioned, the two wins against Brazil, Argentina, those are his first two home games, and suddenly the kind of emotional shift and the psychological kind of pickup that Paraguay needed or the players needed because there was a good team in there. You have obviously Omar Alderete in the Premier League. You had at the time Julio Enciso was in the Premier League. Diego Gómez plays there too. So you have players of quality, but they just didn't kind of have that group mentality or that culture of winning, and Alfaro came in and managed to give them that, and that's how they pulled off some of those incredible results. But also games like Venezuela, they were losing 1-0, came back to win. Colombia, they were 2 goals down, managed to pull it back and get a draw. So all of this kind of fed into Paraguay finally coming back to the World Cup after 16 years.
As someone who lives in the UK, I'm only really exposed to English qualifiers, but I have made a promise to myself that for the next World Cup, I'd like to go and see on the TV some South American qualifiers because it's always a bit feisty down there. What do you think was the highlight game out of all those qualifiers?
That's a good question. I think it's between the Brazil and Argentina games, but I feel it was the Argentina game at home that Argentina showing up as world champions. Paraguay really kind of had they beaten Brazil and drawn with Uruguay, so they kind of were showing signs that they might be able to do anything or do something. But then the Argentina game was this one where it was like, okay, so what is Paraguay really made of? Is there something different? And they go behind early on against Argentina, the world champions, and you think, oh no, maybe this whole kind of the honeymoon period of Alfaro is over already. Nothing's going to happen. And then they fight back and they fight back. And the goal that ends up to be the winning goal is Antonio Sanabria scoring an overhead kick in front of all the fans. And that was just an incredible moment where I think partly the quality of the goal, the quality of the opposition, and then just the fact that everybody collectively felt, oh wow, now we believe like now this could be the time. So I think it's beating Argentina at home. That was really like the big moment, even more so than qualification, because qualification was a funny moment in that Paraguay kind of knew they're qualified, even if they had lost the game against Ecuador. It was a home match too. They probably would have qualified. They ended up drawing 0-0. because they just wanted to get over the line. But I think it was more the Argentina game was that moment of belief, like, okay, I think we're back, and they are indeed.
Of course, and the World Cup is only days away. I think no, it's tomorrow it starts, so literally a day away. I want to get your thoughts then on the group. So Paraguay are the lowest ranked group in this. Sorry, the lowest ranked team in this group. The United States, a host nation, they're obviously going to get the home support. Let's start off with them. How do you see Paraguay shaping up against the United States?
Yeah, they played them in a friendly in November, so they have kind of a recent history and lost that game 2-1. And I think one thing Paraguay really struggled with was the more athleticism, the higher pressing of US. And Paraguay's not a great team on the ball. They're happy outside of possession, playing on the counter attack. So I think when they were tasked with trying to break down the US, they found it difficult. On the positive side, I think Gustavo Alfaro he's a master tactician, as he's kind of shown through the qualifying stages, and so I'm sure he's been working on that and looking very much to this game and how to prepare for it, and maybe has a little edge over Pochettino, who, they're two guys from a very similar place in Argentina, but Alfaro obviously has a bit more experience. He's in his 60s now, and so. I think I have a feeling that Paraguay will be able to do better than they did in that friendly defeat, but not sure if they have enough to win against a host. Because to your point, I mean, the host nation first game, it's also in Los Angeles, which I think is unfortunately for Paraguayans, it's not a great area for them. There's a big Paraguayan community in New York and in the East Coast, but I don't think many will make the trip, so they won't be able to kind of make themselves heard as much as if it'd been in another venue. So I feel Paraguay might be able to get away with a draw in that game, playing that very kind of cautious and defensive way that they often did against big teams in the qualifiers that saw them kind of grind out the results they needed.
And of course, now with the expanded format, the best ranked third place teams could go through. So, I mean, obviously everyone aims for first place, but perhaps for Paraguay, third place could be a realistic expectation with Turkey and Australia in the group.
Yeah, it's a really hard group to kind of figure out, because it is four teams that I think are very well balanced. Paraguay are lowest in the rankings, as you mentioned, but sometimes I think the rankings against CONMEBOL teams, it can be a bit unfavorable because the competition's so hard during qualification. So I think I think it's maybe more balanced even than the rankings suggest. But it's hard to pick out a game where you would say, oh, Paraguay should definitely pick up 3 points. Probably the Australia one is the final game they'll be targeting. But it's also not a game where there's one obvious team that will take 9 points, and there's no obvious team that might be beaten in each game, despite this being the expanded format. So I agree. I think Paraguay are aiming for, of course, as best they can, but would be happy with a third place or a second place, which I think is a slightly kinder draw in terms of travel. But ultimately, I think what we'll see from Paraguay is making themselves very difficult to beat, especially in the first two games, which are arguably the hardest two in US and Turkey, and then maybe really trying to take the game to Australia and get through. And definitely the expectations of fans is to get through the group stage. Paraguay traditionally have done that. 2006, they didn't manage it, but if you go, right back to 1986 and then 98, 2002, 2010, they always got through to the knockout round. So they'll be expecting that.
The injury to Julio Enciso is a huge miss for Paraguay. What is the team going to be like without him? Is there going to be a change in shape? Is there a player that can just easily fill the gap?
Yeah, it's kind of a big conundrum, because Julio Enciso he's a unique talent. I mean, he's a guy that he picks up the ball, runs at you. He can make it really difficult for defenders. He can try and score from outside the box. He's actually added to his game this year at Strasbourg, scoring inside the box, which was something he wasn't doing as much at Brighton. So it is very hard to find a like-for-like replacement. I think Alfaro really has two options. He can replace him with someone with a bit more pace. So that's probably going to be Ramon Sosa from Palmeiras, very good friend of Julio Enciso. Or even Gustavo Caballero, who's been at Portsmouth, who's kind of a late addition to the squad. Or he might go for someone that's just a bit more technical and has a bit more control. So they recently brought in Mauricio, who plays in Palmeiras. He's born in Brazil, but his father was born in Paraguay, so he qualified for Paraguayan nationality that way and didn't play any of the qualifiers because only recently got Paraguayan citizenship. And so Mauricio is one of those guys that he maybe doesn't have the pace of Julio Enciso, but he technically very good, very similar in that respect. And it might be someone that can just keep the ball a bit more when they need it, take a break after what will probably be a game where they don't have most of the possession and hopefully be supporting the team that way. So he's got those two possible ways. The good thing about Enciso is the original fear, because he went stretchered off crying. Everyone was like, "Oh gosh, he's going to miss, the whole World Cup." And then we saw him on Monday, the first training session in the US. He was actually running with the ball. He was training separately, but running with the ball. And so he obviously won't be risked for the US game, but he might even make an appearance against Turkey and probably will play against Australia. So that's a big plus for Paraguay.
Talk to you then about Miguel Almirón. He's obviously been at Atalanta United. I've looked at the goal contributions, and in all fairness, they have been pretty low. But that's what we've come to expect of Almirón, in my opinion, in the last few years. Obviously, age catches up with players too. So what can we expect from Almirón? Obviously, he is the most standout name on that team sheet.
Yeah, with Miguel Almirón, I think he had a real renaissance with Gustavo Alfaro, particularly because there was often a pressure on him to score goals, to make goals. And then actually when Diego Gómez and Julio Enciso came through into the senior team, I think that took a little bit of pressure off him. And what he's really does and what he's been so good at doing is he has the kind of tactical, I would say, ability to make sure he's in the right place defensively and supporting his left back, because he's usually playing on the left. And then he's one of the key players in terms of launching the counter attack. So because he does have that pace and he's able to kind of just hair down the line and take the ball out of danger, that's actually been a very useful quality. He did get on the score sheet in the last friendly against Nicaragua. Really, really well taken goal. And again, it's a breakaway goal. And he's running onto it and finishes very well. But I think Almirón, what we saw is Alfaro put a lot of trust in him. He does that, like I say, that off the ball work really well, which he did at Newcastle, especially under Benitez when he was playing with him. And so I think he's a player that's very trusted. He's kind of a veteran now in the team, and he'll be really important to Paraguay. But we might not see him in terms of goal contribution. That might be passed over to other players in the side.
There's no more friendlies coming up for Paraguay. It's right into the World Cup now. But you mentioned there the last few friendlies. So Nicaragua was a 4-0 Paraguay win, as you would probably expect. They obviously beat Greece 1-0 away from home, but then they lost to Morocco. Now, Morocco's a great side, and actually it probably says more about Morocco than Paraguay in that game. But what could we make of those three games? Because you would have watched them pretty intensely, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think what we saw, especially between Morocco and Greece, was there was a bit of experimentation, and we were seeing something different. Especially we actually saw Julio Enciso play more as a second striker than say as a winger, which was something maybe a bit different from the qualifiers. But what Alfaro is very good is getting the team to adapt. So, for example, they can be almost like a 4-5-1 without the ball, but then become very quickly to a 4-3-3. Or what he does a lot is plays with his back four. He'll play with three almost central defenders, one of them at fullback. Usually Junior Alonso, the left back, he's more of a central defender naturally. So he manages his team in possession to still have that stability, and that's been really important for them, because when Paraguay suffered, especially in the Copa America, they were conceding goals by almost overstretching themselves, and they were counter-attacking, but it was on the counter that they weren't able to defend. And so he's really figured that out. Where they struggle, and so maybe the Morocco game is a good example, is teams that are very comfortable in possession, but also very fast. Paraguay's not a particularly quick team. If you look at the defensive line, Alderete and Gustavo Gómez are two guys that aerially really good, very strong, but they're not the fastest. So if you do have a team of, say, small forwards that are able to really kind of, run at you or expose a player one-on-one, that's where they struggle a bit more. So that's definitely something they have to work on, because individually they know they can't necessarily win those battles defensively. So it's as a collective, how do they defend that?
Mm. So speak to me then about Paraguay's hopes of the World Cup dream. Where do you think Paraguay will finish in the World Cup?
Yeah, well, I think the expectation is to definitely be through the group, and then everybody knows like knockout football, anything could happen. I suppose it's with the expanded format, there's this kind of thing about the last 32 game. Who will that throw up the opponent against? Because traditionally Paraguay, the last 16 had gone out, say in 98 against France, eventual winners, 2002 against Germany, eventual finalists. In 2010, they got to the quarterfinals, but went out to Spain, eventual winners. So usually it's been a big team that has had to knock them out in recent tournaments. So now with the expanded format, maybe that round of 32, they'll feel they can get through depending on where they finish, who they play. And so a last 16 is probably kind of the aim, I suppose, the ceiling of this team. Obviously, anything could happen, and we're not sure. There's so many permutations with the 48 team World Cup that maybe in the last 16 they get a team they feel that they're able to beat, and then they could repeat that success of 2010 and be one of the top 8 teams in the world. Although it seems unlikely, just having watched them, for example, in the Copa America, to think just 2 years later they'd be talking about one of the best 8 teams in the world. That seems maybe a dream too far. So I think the last 16 is the kind of hope, but also I think a quietly confident expectation that they can make that.
And that's why we love the World Cup, right? I love seeing all these underdog stories. A really interesting question, though, from me to you is, you've mentioned that you live in the States, but you have a very big interest on Paraguay as your family's from there. Who are you supporting at the World Cup?
So I've had like the litmus test was 2006 because I was in Frankfurt and it was Paraguay against England. So I had to kind of decide who do I support, and England did come through. So I guess there's something like country of your birth pulls through. But definitely for this tournament, I'm as excited with Paraguay as with England, and it's partly, I think, some of the underdog stories like you were saying. I mean, a lot of the backgrounds of these players. Let's take an example of like Diego Gómez. Like I watched him when he was at Libertad before he even went into Miami and Brighton, and the where he came through, it's not like he's not similar to an England player that has come through an academy and has always maybe since kind of 10 or 11 thought, hey, I probably could end up going pro, and have had these very good facilities and the whole pathway, right, to become a professional. He's from a small town, and he was he got injured when he was about 18, I think, and it was the pandemic, and he wasn't sure if he would come back and even play for Libertad. And so just to see some of these players are now going to be in a $5 billion stadium in the SoFi Stadium playing against the US, who have come through similar, right? All those great facilities they've had to get there. I think that's fun, and that brings a bit of the romanticism back. We talk about a lot about over commercialization of football, and so the World Cup's a great, I think, leveler in a way, because we get to see some of those stories, and everybody meets in a game where honestly Paraguay could win. They could beat the US in that opening match, despite all those differences in terms of background and how they started in football.
The last question I've got, I know I just said it was the last one. Are you going to any games now that you're in the States?
Well, unfortunately, the ticket prices are not conducive to going to many games. I would have liked to go to Paraguay, but being in California, it really is a huge distance. I live in Texas. It really is a huge difference. But I'm hoping to go to some Houston games or Dallas games, get some tickets late on, and go and see some players, and especially, I mean, in Houston we have Curacao are going to be playing on Sunday, so that could be an exciting one to see a totally new team in the World Cup.
Well, Ralph, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I love speaking about Paraguay.